So welcome back, everyone. We'll be now transitioning into the law enforcement panel. Um, and so I'm going to introduce to you the two people who will be leading this conversation. So Martha Dreyer is back. She is the liaison, community liaison here at Northwestern College, but she's also, and she'll hopefully speak to this, done a lot of work in her community of Sioux Center, with Ulf Schaefer, who's here, and they've worked together on some initiatives. And also Mark Prosser, who used to be or has recently retired as the chief of police in Storm Lake, and now is doing diaconal work, I believe, in pastoral work in the Catholic Church down in Sioux City. Mark and Martha are going to lead this conversation. So I'll turn it over to Mark, who will introduce our panel, and we'll begin.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a real honor to be with you. Jason, on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Immigration Forum, congratulations on this event, and we're real happy with you and all of our staff that put on these forums around the country. So I'm honored to introduce some of my former peers and law enforcement professionals from around mid-Iowa and northwestern Iowa. I'd like to introduce Chief Mike Tupper. Mike has a long and distinguished career in Iowa, serving a couple of different agencies, but since 2011 has been the chief in Marshalltown, and we'll hear from him in just a few moments. Officer Ulf Schaefer has been with the Sioux Center Police Department for well over 20 years, so over 21 years, and is a senior officer with that department. Chief Chris Cole has a career spanning over 25 years with the Storm Lake Police Department and took the helm as their chief in January of this year. Chief Shane McSheehy, I don't see him, I see a square on the panel, but not his face. Comes with a 24-year career out of Eustis, Florida, and has been the Pella chief for the last 2 years. And I don't see Chief Muller on unless somebody else does, but we were expecting Chief Rex Muller. Rex, a police officer with the Sioux City Police Department since 1996, and the chief there since 2017. So I think, Martha, do you have anything else before I go into our first question?
No, go ahead. Thank you.
All right, very good. Once again, really thanks to our administrators and officers who are joining us this morning for this important conversation. So first question up, and I'm going to direct this right off the bat to Mike and Chris. Does current immigration law or policy pose challenges for local law enforcement? And if so, what are those challenges? Mike, if you would go first on that, please.
Yeah, thanks. First thing I need to say is, Mark, you look like you've gotten younger since you retired. Retirement looks good on you.
The weight's off, buddy.
So, the question was, does current immigration policy impact our operations, correct? Did I hear that correctly? That's
correct. And if so, how does it impact?
Yeah. So absolutely. So the national discussion on immigration and a lot of the negative rhetoric that you hear associated with this topic directly impacts our operations every day here in Marshalltown. I have a story that I often share from right after the election in 2016. Our officers during the day, middle of the day, called to a burglary in progress, which is pretty unusual during the day to have a burglary in progress. But neighbors saw some people climbing through a window at a house and assumed that they were breaking into the house, because why weren't they using the door? They were going through the windows. And so the police went to that location and found an open window, talked to some people, received some information that made it sound like there could be a burglary in progress. They knocked on the door, they tried to get in the house, couldn't get in the house, but they saw some people looking out the window. And then the people closed the curtain real quick, and the cops automatically assumed that there must be a burglary in progress. Well, long story short, they were finally able to get into this house, and the people that climbed through the window actually lived in the house, but they were undocumented, and they assumed that we were coming to enforce some sort of immigration law or immigration detention order. And that was just solely based on election results in 2016. They jumped to that conclusion, and all the rhetoric that they heard in the news media and on social media, they just automatically assumed that local law enforcement was now in the immigration business. So the conversation does impact us, and it makes it very difficult for us to perform our duties, to build relationships. Law enforcement cannot be successful without trust. And the national conversation and the negativity around this issue has diminished trust in our community, made it very difficult for local law enforcement to do the job.
Thank you. And Chris, same question. How does that national conversation on immigration and policy, how does that challenge, or does it challenge your administration and your community?
We've basically had the same type of experience here in Storm Lake, where there's a lot of fear, distrust, and you know, with social media, it's not uncommon where there could be rumors of ICE raids. And so we've had several incidents where members of the public have come to some of our Hispanic officers and said, hey, you know, I heard that there was a raid in this other community that's close to Storm Lake, and they're coming to Storm Lake next. And so there was no truth to that, but there was a lot of fear. There was people that were not going to work. There were people hiding out at home. And so, you know, just to piggyback on what Chief Tupper said, trust is paramount for us, and for our communities to remain safe. We really have to have trust with law enforcement, because if immigrants that live in our communities are not willing to report crimes, then they just basically open the door to predators and become, you know, repeated victims of different crimes. And there's people out there that will prey on immigrant communities with the belief that they will not report those crimes. And so building trust and building relationships is super important. And anything that undermines that is counterproductive for local law enforcement.
Thank you.
That's great. And I hear you both leaning into this idea of trust. And when Officer Ulf first approached me over a year ago and said, you know, I want to get involved and I want to do this, build trust and have this established rapport with the community, how important is that? And how do we even go about building these relationships and this trust within this community when you have all of this distrust and that's all that is known? And Ulf, I'll start off with you.
Thanks, Martha. Good to see you, by the way. The building the trust, you know, this started for me. I've been with the same department for over 20 years, been through the growth of our immigration population, and the trust was never there to begin with. And that comes from a national rhetoric, I believe, that just these undocumented people just hear secondhand, thirdhand, and they buy into this. And from us, from a department, what we decided to do is we need to change this, since our trend always has been our immigration population is growing, and it is growing. It's not nearly to the levels like, for example, Storm Lake would be, but you look at our whole population itself, and then look at the population that we have in the schools, you know, which is at about 35% minority right now, somewhere around there. There's definitely a need to improve our communication with the immigration population and the trust with that. We have had several instances, one that we were working or tried to solve involving human trafficking as payments to get the transportation up to the States from the Central American countries. And these crimes were never reported because of a lack of trust. And so I got a hold of Martha, and for about a year and a half now, we have been in small groups going into churches, meeting with individual people, meeting with small leaders in their prospective minority populations to try to start a dialogue, try to assure the population that even though they might not be legal residents by status, they are residents of our community. They belong to us. We grow with them and they grow with us. And so over the last year, we have seen quite improvements when it comes to that communication with that population.
Yeah, thanks, Alf. And it's interesting to see how when we first started, right, because of the level of distrust, kind of the amount of closed lips or just complaining to now actually being ready to build a relationship. So I'm going to follow up with Rex. Thanks for joining us with the same question, sort of in the as we're talking about trust and building trust. Can you share a little bit about how your agency creates trust and relationships within the immigrant communities?
Well, I'm sure that, I think Iowa as a whole is a very progressive state as far as our relationships with our communities and our ties to community policing. For us, our success is always, we've either succeeded or failed based on our ability to connect with our community, build personal relationships. So right now with COVID, that's a challenge that I think all of our departments are facing because it has heavily impacted our outreach ability. That's one of those things that we can have all the training in the world for our staff on cultural competency, things like that, but it comes down to putting people together to overcome fear. So for us, getting out in the community, being a part of community events, being a part of church events in our communities of color, offering and inviting people in to get to know them, to overcome any misunderstandings or that public rhetoric like was previously mentioned that might damage our ability. But for us, it's assume that those bridges are always under construction, is never get to the point as a department that we say to ourselves, we've got it figured out, we have the buy-in of the community. No, you spend every day figuring out how we can find new ways to reach our communities, how we can find new ways to engage them and bring officers and community members together. How do we reach them young through youth outreach, through the schools, find ways to reach these communities so that as we get to them, that there's understanding in that youth piece, and then that grows, and the parents, and there's so many ways to do that. I mean, for us, what our concentration has been on is finding what new communities are coming so that we can engage them early. We've got a new East African community that is getting larger, and understanding that it's actually Eritrean, initially thought to be Somalian, but there are cultural pieces in there that you need to know to understand them, and how do we get involved in their public events. So, outreach and community policing to me is the best thing. The training for our staff becomes secondary, but engaging, putting people together to me is always the best way to build understanding.
Wow, that's great. And before I turn it over to Mark, Shane, any thoughts as to how to encourage and help build relationships within the community, the immigrant community, from a law enforcement perspective?
Sure, and good morning, everyone. I apologize for the complications with video. So I am the new guy in town, actually. I have only been in Iowa for 3 months. My career has spanned 26 years in Florida. I retired as a captain. So, but I think it's relevant. So I'm really going to kind of speak, if I could, about experiences that we had in Florida. Eustis is a town that is northwest of Orlando, about an hour. So we were a suburb of Orlando, and our demographics were about 38% minorities within our city. And we experienced actually quite a bit of diverse population. And so, when I speak, I would just like to speak on some of our successes and perhaps help you understand maybe some of the things that we didn't do so well. But one of the things that we learned, and this was a repeated lesson learned is you cannot wait for the community to come to you. And so while relationships are a two-way street, law enforcement is always tasked with making the first step and always having those approaches in mind to where we are almost using that as a daily focus. So you can never build a relationship in a crisis. And when you have that crisis and you don't have those relationships in place, it's obviously too late. Identifying the stakeholders in those different communities are very, very important because, they become essentially your partners. That transparency and trust is not just given. You have to go in and you have to earn it every single day. And so part of our success is we're finding out who those community stakeholders were and involving them in things within the agency, such as hiring boards, grievance panels, use of force type areas where we can bring them in and sit in, bringing them into our community policing aspect. Our Citizens Academy was a wonderful tool to bring in our stakeholders and to help them understand and to start building those relationships, and then using them, to push out information and to start bridging, some of those deficiencies within our gaps. So again, can't speak too much of Iowa yet. It's a great place. I'm having a great time, but I just haven't been here long enough to really speak of the community here at large.
That's great. Thanks.
All right, so Shane, we're going to come right back at you with another question because you have experience in other states and now getting experience in Iowa. And this comes from one of our viewers. What role does ICE's practices across the nation play into that distrust with law enforcement or impact relationship with law enforcement? Can you speak to that, please?
I can. Until we come together locally, regionally, at the state level and federal level regarding immigration laws, we're always going to have, this area of disconnect. And it happened in the county that I came from, which was Lake County in Florida. We had a sheriff who was very pro working with ICE officials, and if an immigrant made his or her way to our local facility, they were quick to put a detainer on and wrote strongly regarding, that would be a standing procedure for all immigrants who are arrested for any offense. And while that wasn't the role of the Eustis Police Department to go out and seek compliance with immigration statuses, we'd make arrests on individuals throughout the month, and some would be citizens and some would be immigrants. It really, that procedure, that culture within the jail system within our county got out very quickly in our community. And, we had a very, very difficult time having some of our immigrants report crime. And we were just starting to kind of bridge that gap and kind of get over the hump to where, we had some great relationships, and it really just put us, several steps back.
Thank you. Chris, some of the communities in Iowa are changing pretty drastically, and most certainly the one that you serve in Storm Lake is no exception. How does your agency overcome language barriers so they can provide services? And are there any gaps that should be addressed?
There's always going to be gaps. As you know, we have over 20 languages spoken in our school district. And so we really focus on collaborating with other agencies within the community. And when it comes to language barriers, you have to look in the communities within the communities. And so, oftentimes we're going to be dealing, if we have a person that speaks a language that we don't have staff on our agency that speaks that language, we're going to have to go through our local hospital, the school district, the packing plants to try and overcome that. It's, again, it's about getting the community stakeholders. And in Storm Lake, it's going back on the trust aspect. There's like a role reversal with social capital in Storm Lake with kids versus parents, oftentimes in an immigrant family, if neither of the parents speak the language, the children have a higher social capital than the parents, which is not how most of us were brought up. And so the kids know how to speak the language, they know how to find the answers and the resources. And so oftentimes the adults depend on the children to come up with problem solving skills. And so it's super important to have that trust and engage the youth so that the youth know that the law enforcement is on their side. And, oftentimes, the kids are going to be the ones that are bringing you in as a law enforcement officer, or telling the parents, hey, we need to call the police on this. They're here to help. And so it's very important to look within the communities for language gaps and language barriers.
Thank you. And kind of a parallel question, and I'm going to shoot this one at both Ulf and Mike, because we want a perspective from Central Iowa and then Northwest Iowa. What resources exist in Iowa to assist law enforcement agencies in understanding and bridging cultural differences with newly arriving immigrant communities? And Mike, if you would lead that off with your experience in Central Iowa.
Well, here locally, we have a group called Immigrant Allies, and it's a group that's worked in our local community for many, many years now, and they've built a lot of relationships with not just the communities and the neighborhoods themselves, but the resources that are available for immigrant populations. I'm fortunate that I'm fairly close to Des Moines, so we're able to reach out to organizations like Embark, the state Human Rights Division, Latino Affairs Division. We're close to those kind of resources, and those folks they oftentimes have a presence in our community because we're so close to Des Moines. So some of those state partnerships and resources have been very valuable to us.
Thank you. And Ulf, how about up in Northwest Iowa in the Sioux Center area? How are your access to resources up there to help you with shifts in demographics?
What we have been seeing, we really, I don't want to say rely on, but we really can't rely on state resources or things like that. Sometimes we do feel in Northwest Iowa that we're more part of South Dakota to the rest of the state than we are part of Iowa. But we do have a wonderful, wonderful group of individuals and organizations within our community that have been available for us for a long time now, Martha being part of one of them. And we have some faith-based groups that really have stepped up to start helping bridge that gap for us a little bit. And, we do get newcomers all the time from different locations in Central and South America. And our groups, we really can lean on. They have the connections within the community, like Chris had mentioned, that we can lean on those resources, and they are doing a wonderful job for us, assisting us in starting the conversations with the communities.
If I can just add, Mark, the faith community is our go-to for everything, quite frankly. The Catholic Church has been an important partner for us for the Latino community. So I would strongly encourage anyone that's looking to build positive community relationships between law enforcement and the immigrant communities they serve to utilize the faith community to do that. They've been a huge partner for us.
Thank you. Martha?
That's great. I'm going to shift us gears a little bit. And Rex, in your opinion, what types of changes in the current immigration law and policies would be beneficial to your agency and your community?
I think, I'll just talk from my perspective. My wife's Hispanic. I have a Hispanic extended family. So I think that's given me a deeper appreciation for what my wife's parents went through to come here and what their struggles were and how they embraced the culture and the adjustments that they made. I've always thought that seeing so many people go through this, because I'm sure the other chiefs in this have filled out paperwork for immigration attorneys, but personally, a pathway, a quicker and less expensive and easier pathway to citizenship. I think that it's just simply too difficult and hard for a lot of people, especially those without resources, to legally immigrate. I think that encourages illegal immigration. So how do we streamline the system? How do we maybe make a national system of ID or identification that's easily available so that these individuals that do come here while they're awaiting status can utilize resources? Personally, I think the system itself encourages illegal immigration. So in my way of thinking, how do you create a more streamlined system? I think both parties have spoken about it, but I'd like to see, excuse me, but I'd like to see some solid action moving towards that, as opposed to just a discussion that the immigration system is broken. So for me, again, a faster pathway to legalized immigration. I think nothing is gained. And I speak to family after family who tell me about the amount of money that they've spent attempting to do it the right way. It shouldn't be that hard. I think if you're a legal citizen, you're contributing to the community, you're obeying the law. I think there should be a very quick pathway for you that does not require so many financial resources to get you there. And I think in the long run, I think it will probably reduce costs from the state, local, and federal side, because there'll be less need to deal with the immigration and the assistance issues that come with illegal immigration. But if you review, if the governments would just embrace that and move forward with that, I think that'd be a good way for positive reform.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're right. There's a lot of misconceptions that oftentimes there's a lack of will of becoming a documented citizen, which you're alluding to that it just is really long. It's a really long process. And I can attest to that as being here for, over 30 years and still going through the system. So Shane, I just kind of want to follow up with the same question and your opinion, both currently and in your previous experiences, what immigration law and policies would be beneficial to your agency and your community?
Yes, so I echo Chief Mueller's sentiment. I actually have a very similar situation. My wife is also Hispanic, and her extended family back in Florida. We have spent obviously several, Christmases and birthdays and so forth and such. And I get to talk to them, as a family member, not a police officer. And, over and over again, a lot of the same sentiments have been said repeatedly. It's too expensive, it's too difficult, and there's no advocates. Some of them don't know even where to start, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so I agree. I think the fact that if you make something so hard, so difficult, and so expensive, it almost encourages you to do the wrong thing. And so unfortunately, I have much to add, but I do echo that sentiment.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I add a couple things?
Yeah, please.
DACA's easy. Let's get DACA done. It's easy. Okay. Most people in our community support DACA right now. Let's do it. And driver's licenses for immigrants in Iowa. Let's let undocumented people get a driver's license in Iowa. That would make our life in law enforcement a lot easier. It would allow people to feel like they're part of the community. Those are two things that we can get done easily. And let's quit allowing politicians to use this issue as a political football, okay? Because people on both sides of the political aisle are abusing this issue. And we've all been hearing for almost 30 years now, since Ronald Reagan did anything with immigration, that we needed to do more, but we're not doing anything. And every 4 years we hear Democrats and Republicans talk about this issue, but they don't do anything. Let's hold them accountable and make sure that they do something.
Amen. Thank you for that. Chris, how does positive or negative rhetoric, kind of even on the same line, by elected officials directly impact those living in your community?
I was told a story by some residents here in Storm Lake a while back where and they're legal residents, but they were fearful to cross over the border into Mexico because they were afraid that they may be scrutinized and there might be a problem with them coming back into the U.S. And so, that's problematic to our local residents when they have family that live in other countries, whether they're here documented or undocumented. They don't want to go back to visit relatives. They don't, there was an illness in a family and they were afraid to go back to Mexico to see their parents because they were afraid they would have trouble getting across coming back. And so, fear is a huge motivator, and it can affect people in a lot of different ways. And that all stemmed from, the national dialogue about the crackdown. And, I'm all for border security, but, when we have people that are citizens or residents here that are afraid to come across the border because they're afraid they're going to be denied re-entry and they're going to be stuck in another country, that's a problem.
Mm.
So Rex, on the heels of that particular question, should the Iowa legislature be involved in legislating immigration-related laws at a state level? If so, why or why not?
If it's good policy, Mark, I think, one of the things that was brought up was the DL piece. I think an ID, if they're not going to do a national ID that allows people to, the ID piece for me is a security piece for us identifying people as good actors or bad actors. But if the feds aren't going to take that action, then maybe the state should take some action so that, almost like with our homeless population, when we get immigrant population in here, that, there's like coordinated entry, that we know who they are, we can get them to services, we can get them on their feet, help them be successful, help them be productive. There's a lot of discussion about, bringing immigration out of the shadows. So, on a state level, be known that Iowa has progressive policies on immigration and positive policies on immigration that not only assist the good immigrants, but provide law enforcement the appropriate tools to deal with those who are bad actors in our community. So striking a balance. So if the federal government and the politicians who use it as we said, a political football, aren't willing to do the right thing, then why not allow Iowa, if we can get past the division, why not allow Iowa to develop sound policies and then show people at the national level that we can come up with some common sense solutions, and then maybe the federal government follows suit. So in that respect, if we've got good ideas on the state level and we can get past, and I know the political division is creeping into the state level even, which in the last several years, which didn't used to be as prevalent, but if we can get something done on the state level, it might serve as an example for the national level. I mean, I would like to see us be an example. It's always nice when Iowa doesn't have the problems that other states do, because we have smart people in this state, and we have, we're a welcoming state, and we have all the right things in place. So can we do that? I'd like to think we could. I think we have the resources and the brain power and the immigrant power to do that. But can we bring people at the state level together to accomplish it?
Thank you. A question from one of our viewers, and we're going to send this one to Ulf for his reflection, is as immigration advocates and service providers, we often say that we are working ourselves out of a job, meaning we are actively working to create a world where our work is not needed. Does law enforcement have that same perspective or goal?
I don't believe from a personal perspective that we are working ourselves out of a job at all. I think we're working ourselves into a job, into a new role of a job, especially from an immigration perspective, because our perspectives always have been changing, and with the influx of all the immigration population, it's ever more important that we do become more flexible, do become more open to new ideas, be that on a local or state level or a federal level, and to work with that to really continue to mold ourselves into a way that's going to be more helpful to everybody else and more helpful to law enforcement in itself as well.
Thank you. Another question from our viewers, and I'm going to send this to Mike and Shane both. I'd like your perspectives. We've seen instances of a handful of individuals, or even one, being able to poison that trust with immigrant communities, especially if that person is in a position of power similar to law enforcement. Do you face any challenges in having your entire force operate with the same purpose and mindset when it comes to engagement with immigrant communities? And how have you achieved success in that area? So Mike, if you would start off with that.
That's an interesting question. That's a tough issue too, because I have 43 cops that work in this building, and certainly it's a diverse group politically. It's a diverse group in terms of education and some of the things that they believe in. So I think it all starts with leadership. And so I have to be consistent with the messages that I'm providing internally in the department. And when we set goals and making sure that people understand our mission and values and what's important to us. And I also have to be consistent in the community and making sure that the community knows what our values are and what our goals are and what we're trying to get accomplished. And it's, Mark, you were in this business for a long time. You're going to have people that internally in your building don't always agree with what you're trying to get accomplished. And but at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to lead our departments in the best way that we can. And if somebody decides on the city council or the city manager decides that they want to move in another direction, that they will, they're going to do that. So I just try to be consistent with messages and not worry about some of the negativity or the noise that comes out of these discussions. We're going to value working with our community here, and outreach is important to us, and making sure that everybody in our community feels like they're properly served and represented by the Marshalltown Police Department. That's always the goal. And we do our best to drown out the other negative noise. Did I answer your question?
It's sure you always answer my questions. Thank you. Shane, how about from your perspective and experience?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, overwhelmingly police officers, want to do the right thing, but they also want to know what the rules are. And, when you don't set a clear example, especially from the top down, and you confuse the message, or you convolute the mission, that's where you have some potential for some officers to go in a different direction. So I think Chief Tupper is correct. I mean, you have to be clear on what that message is. And unfortunately, we have to remain flexible as well, because, as look at COVID, for example, it seems like every week we have a new policy about something. And so remaining flexible, is important in that regard. But just having a clear message and delivering that message to your officers, and let them know what those expectations are. One of the things that I walked in here with was a daily focus for our men and women who work for this agency, because I have to begin with them. It doesn't mean that they're my most important focus, but they're my first focus every day in valuing, mentoring, and giving the officers the knowledge and the tools that they need, because you can have whatever vision that you want from the top down, but if you don't value and mentor your employees to go out and deliver that message, you're going to have a disconnect. So there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to take a little time now for each of our panelists, give you 2 or 3 minutes apiece for the purpose of what do you want to tell the communities of color that you serve in your jurisdiction and our audience? What message do you want to bring to this forum today? And take 2 or 3 minutes just to share with us. And we're going to start with Mike.
Man, I was hoping somebody else would go first. Well, we value our community. I mean, that's the main thing that we're trying to get out to the public, and it's important to us that we reach all corners of our community, that we serve the entire community. And their perspective is important to us. And oftentimes in this business, law enforcement will go out and they'll tell people what they think. They'll give nice speeches about what they're trying to get accomplished. But the most important thing that we're trying to do here is listen, especially this year. I think after what happened in Minneapolis in May, it's caused a lot of us to reflect on how we can do a better job with our outreach and how we can make sure that we are serving underserved populations. And the most important thing that we can do right now is listen. So that's what we've been trying to do. It's been hard with COVID. We have found a couple ways to do it with outdoor events and with social media, but we want the public to understand that we work for them. That's one of the first things that I say to people when I get in front of them is I work for you. And I put my personal cell phone number on every business card that I hand out. And my wife hates that I do that. But people need to know that I work for them and that I'm responsible to them, and they can get a hold of me if they need to. And we can talk about things and we can have difficult conversations. So the other thing that we try to make sure the public understands is that our cops they're just part of the community. They're just like everybody else. They're working a job, they're paying a mortgage, they're trying to raise a family. And if we all work together and we're all listening to each other and communicating with each other, we can build a safe and prosperous community.
Thank you for sharing. Shane, how about you? What do you want to tell the communities of color that you serve?
Well, I think the fact that, servant leadership is not only to the members of your agency, but it's also to members of the community. And so, I think the minute that we stop having conversations is really a detriment to both sides. We're not always going to agree. But the minute that we're not willing to hear and listen to each other and have some of those tough discussions, I think we're taking a step backwards. And so one of the things that I encourage my officers to do, I'm sure like every other chief does, is to get out and to talk to people. But don't talk with just the intent of your, it being your turn to speak next, but get out and have, honest conversations. And that includes, obviously, all the folks in our community have, the same voice, and we need to recognize the importance of that.
Thank you. Wolf, how about you? What do you want to tell the folks that you serve, especially the communities of color in your jurisdiction?
I had to find the right button first. Our talking point always has been and always will be that we are one community. And it's a cliche to say that we are trying to get everybody to come out of the shadows, but yet this cliche speaks very true, even in a small community like ours. We are one community. Everybody is part of this community. We are becoming richer because of our immigrant population, just as vice versa. They become richer from being here. And I don't mean this in a fiscal way, but in a cultural way. And our officers, we try to get them to really interact, go out, don't just do traffic stops. We stand for law and order, we are police, but it is just as important for our officers to go have, I call them positive interactions and negative interactions, like a traffic stop being a negative interaction with the public. That's how they see us. But positive interactions, to go up to people, to start conversations, to sit down and have a sandwich with them, drink coffee with them, and do the one-on-one communication that just opens up everything. I mean, we have to start from the bottom up to make sure that everybody is included and knows which direction we are trying to go. The communication later comes on, it needs to be improved, and we talked about, what can be done on a federal or state level as far as laws or policies. But it does have to come from each one of us, from all of our officers themselves, to start out and get that one-on-one communication going and have positive interactions.
Thank you very much. Chris, how about you?
I would tell our community that, our goal as the Storm Lake Police Department is to provide fair and equitable services to everyone in our community. We don't care what your color is. We don't care what your sexual orientation, your political affiliations. We don't care if you're documented, undocumented. We want to provide fair and equitable services for everyone. And we want to work with you, not against you. And we're all better when we work together. I'm not a person of color, but I see everyone in our community that is of color. I see you, I hear you, I stand with you. And, we're here for you. We're here for everyone. That's, basically in a nutshell what I would tell them.
Thank you. And Rex, how about you?
Well, I feel like the opening band that has to go last after all these chiefs. So I think all of them stated it really well. And there's a saying that says, the police are the people and the people are the police. I mean, that piece that, the citizens need to understand that their neighbors are police officers. Their kids are going to school with police officers' kids, that we're all, a part of this community. And for us, respecting the community, I feel like a better person because I have better understanding of the cultures of this community. I feel like we're a better community because of the diversity in the community. So when the community as a whole embraces how much diversity and different cultures in the community, how much that enhances the community, and it can't just be the police. In Sioux City, we've got a multicultural fair that happens every year. A lot of festivals, a lot of things that bring people in and establish, that understanding and make people appreciate other cultures. And as a department that we're constantly going to seek to hire diversity and reflect our community as police agencies by having people of color on the department. But just that, I think what's been reiterated by each chief is that communication piece. Nothing beats bringing people together. Nothing beats making the effort to have positive interactions with your community outside enforcement efforts, to build understanding, to have those conversations, that your police force is well trained, that your police force reflects your community, that you want to have those conversations, that you're open to criticism. I mean, there's so many things that have to happen, but to me, and this whole discussion comes back to that interaction piece. How well do we interact with our community? We talk about the history of policing on how just the mere putting officers in squad cars separated us from our community. So getting our officers out of the squad car, getting, in this case, past COVID, so that we can re-engage with our community and reestablish and rebuild those bridges. So just the willingness, just the understanding by our community that we're them. We're not a separate segment of society. We're their neighbors, and we want the same things for the community as a whole. And that means everybody, people of color, every member of our community. So I really can't, I feel like a broken record in saying repeating all the things that these great chiefs have said. I think we're all in the same boat and we've all got the same message.
Thank you. I have a circle back question, but I want to ask Martha if she's had any questions pop up first before I do that.
I'll let you ask your circle back question. I just had some final thoughts there, Mark. Go ahead.
All right, and it goes to what you brought up, Rex. So we're going to actually let you take care of this one because you touched on it in your last comment. Is it important for your agency to mirror the look of your community?
Yeah, absolutely. It's to me, it's as much a piece for the community than it is for the department. I think, like I said, putting people together is a good way to build empathy and understanding. So when we put our community members with our police officers to build understanding, well, I think it's just as important that our officers work in a group of officers that looks like their community. I mean, that understanding starts as the officers interact. I mean, there's nothing better than officers having those conversations that often happen with citizens, where an officer of color can tell a fellow officer, a white fellow officer, that, hey, this is my experience. This is what brought me into policing. And we've been fortunate in that we've had some good diversity in our hiring pools recently, and incredible, educated, quality candidates who have a background, that they have learned from. A lot of these folks have hard upbringings, and it brought them to law enforcement. One would think just the opposite, that somebody would have a hard upbringing that would drive them away from policing, but just the opposite. So, I mean, I think it's an important piece. It should be the focus of any department and any chief to reflect the community that you serve. And it's tough because we all know in fact, I'm probably fighting all these other chiefs for good candidates of color, and we're going to continue to do that because it makes our department better. And I think it's good for the citizens, but again, I think it's good for the officers to work in a diverse working environment. And we need to constantly seek to do that, not just in the police departments, but in our cities. The city administrators should be looking at ways to make sure that you're placing people of color in administrative positions, and that your workforce in city government also reflects your citizens.
Thank you. Martha?
That is so great. And it's just been a real treat hearing from all of you guys. I grew up, fearing police on so many levels and trying to stay in the shadows. And so just to hear your hearts and your thoughts on this has been incredible. And I think it's up to us too to advocate for you and just share this message with everyone that you guys are here truly to protect and serve. And we are so thankful for all of you. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll wait for Martha to mute. It's all right. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful, wonderful panel. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're all super busy, but to take the time to do this, I'm very grateful. So thank you so much for your insights. Thank you to Mark and to Martha for leading a wonderful, wonderful conversation.